Good afternoon. If everyone would take their seats, please. We've got to wait for the organizers to settle down. Good afternoon, and welcome to the afternoon session. I'm Rita Sheeman. I'm Director of Publications and Executive Editor at the American Physiological Society. And I'm also a member of the SSP committee that organized this joint conference. And I am delighted to introduce our vendor keynote speaker, Caitlin Trasande. Caitlin will address the practical and applied implications of how government mandates and regulations drive innovations and research information management technologies. Caitlin will be tying in remarks made by our publisher keynote, Jane, and our librarian keynote, Scott. Caitlin is in a unique position to do this. She has spent 5 years at Digital Science, most recently as head of research policy, and she holds a PhD in neurobiology. Caitlin has very recently been appointed senior strategy editor for Nature at Nature Publishing Group. And last but not least, Caitlin will illustrate with examples of products developed by digital science how all sectors of the scholarly community are finding solutions to help and to enable compliance with mandates, such as those on data and open access. Some of these products will be familiar to us, such as Figshare and Symplectic. And Caitlin will provide a look ahead at how the UK government has begun to ask funded researchers to explain more broadly the social impact of their research and how digital science has worked with the UK government in this, and what the odds are as to whether this will actually come leaping across the pond to the US. Caitlin Trasande.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this terrific meeting. And Jane and Scott really set me up well with their excellent talks. And I'm going to riff on Scott's slide about data is the new bacon. And I'm going to put forth, you heard it here first, social impact is the emerging bacon. And that is the point I will end with at the end of my talk. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. You're struggling a little? Okay. How's that? Okay. So I'm going to start with a 30,000-foot view of digital science for those of you who may not be familiar with digital science. I'm then going to do a deep dive from the lens of how information policy has shaped the development of products with two companies within the digital science portfolio, Symplectic and Figshare. Lastly, I'm going to invite you to join me in looking into the future a little bit about how societal impact is becoming an important driver for many of the new mandates that are coming from government. And we're going to look at the UK's Research Excellence Framework and digital sciences involvement with helping the UK government analyze their case study exercises and impact statements as an example of this. Before I begin, I just wanted to shout out to two people in the audience. Actually, I don't think one is in the audience, but Howard Ratner gave me my first job in science publishing about 10 years ago and took a chance on someone who had absolutely no IT background to work for his team. So I wanted to thank him for that. And I see my colleague Amy Brand in the audience. Amy has been my boss for the past year and a half, and just a terrific colleague and a wonderful, wonderful mentor and leader. So I'm so happy to see her in the audience. So digital science funds and supports startups that build software for research. And as I'm going to allude to in a few slides, the secret sauce of digital science is the founders. And so in a way, it's a very innovative business model insofar as we're outsourcing innovative ideas to the research community itself and inviting the research community to innovate. And I'm actually going to show you in a few slides that doesn't necessarily or always mean a product. It could be a project, and we have mechanisms to fund that as well. The scope of research for digital science is the full life cycle of research, and this gives the organization a lot of strength in the diversity of its domain expertise. So this spans activities that are intrinsic to the research enterprise, ranging from reading the scientific literature, the first place you start as a graduate student, finding interesting papers, pursuing the literature and understanding some of the seminal papers and finding research of interest, to working in a laboratory for researchers that are in wet lab science, learning how to train in proper techniques and become certified, complying with mandates for safety, managing laboratory inventory, collecting data and planning experiments and executing those experiments, to writing up your findings, to publishing your data that may not end up in a paper. As any bench scientist will tell you, the vast majority of the research they conduct never makes it into a published paper. And this has been, for one of our founders, a point of frustration, and I affectionately refer to our founders as the disgrunterati. I actually can't claim credit for that term. I think it was actually a librarian who came up with that. But basically, people who decided to stop being the last person to complain about something being broken or not working or being inefficient, and to build a solution. And as we all know, those solutions need support and resource to grow. And one model is through grants. That's a very viable model. But another model is through a more sustainable model is through creating a product that people are willing to pay for to then further fund research and innovation and continuing to develop that product. So the research, the scope for research that digital science, excuse me, is interested in also includes post-publication. So after papers have been published, what's referred to as the gray literature reference to that paper. So newspaper articles, magazine articles, social media, tweets, blog posts, references to that paper that is not captured by the scholarly literature. It's not part of the formal scholarly citation system. And yet it is incredibly important and increasingly so, particularly as governments become more interested in societal impact for research. And then to the more enterprise-level solutions for universities and publishers and funders to apply sophisticated algorithms to data mining and understanding big picture topics that are derived from massive databases of content. And so digital science's remit is from the microscopic, and I mean that literally microscopic, to the more figuratively telescopic view. So from the researcher or technician working in the lab that wants a better way of managing inventory, all the way up to the president's office in thinking about how a university can convey its impact to the world in a more sophisticated way, digital storytelling. And this is particularly important for universities that have, they may not be marquee name universities, major research institutes in the top, Carnegie classification sense, but they often have a very strong relationship with their local community, and they have a huge impact on the cities that they exist in, and local issues around ecology, et cetera. And these are, to my view, like unsung heroes of research. And I've talked to many leaders of research organizations that want to enhance their brand and reputation in modern ways. As I mentioned before, the secret sauce of digital science is the founders. So our founders, pretty much as a rule, all come from academia. So graduate students, laboratory technicians, in some cases faculty members, who personally experienced the pain of a particular problem and sought to build a solution. And sometimes very organically, that solution grew and grew to a point where it became software that other people wanted, and it made sense for it to become a company. I'll highlight as one example, the founder of Symplectic, one of the founders of Symplectic, Daniel Hook, is a theoretical physicist by training, and the seed of his company emerged during his PhD at Imperial College, when he was lending his time and energy and brilliance to helping researchers contribute to the REF's predecessor, the REA, but essentially reporting on research activity and doing it in a more efficient, less burdensome way. And so that evolved into a software product, that evolved into a company which now serves dozens and dozens of universities all around the world. And so if I had to encapsulate it into a pithy nutshell, I would say that digital science is all about solutions that are by researchers for researchers. And as I mentioned also, in some cases, that might not be a product, that might be a project. And we have a mechanism for supporting those kinds of innovative ideas as well. And I'll make a little plug for our grant, the Catalyst grant, which is currently open for submissions, and the current cycle's deadline is June 30th. So if you've got an innovative idea, or someone on your team has this great idea, that we invite you to submit your idea. And you can just Google Digital Science Catalyst Grant. And please share out with your networks that we are open for submissions, and that will close on June 30th. When the problems are very complex, maybe at the edge of what is technically capable of analyzing, it sometimes makes more sense for us to provide consulting services. We may not have a product, there may not be a product on the marketplace that can address some of the issues that many large organizations have, governments, funders, publishers in some cases. And so we also provide a consulting service. And my last few slides will be highlighting an example of a consulting service that we have provided. So the first company I want to do a deep dive with you into is Symplectic. Symplectic is a research information management product. The product is called Elements. And a research information management system helps remove the burden of managing research and scholarly data and information from the administrators and from the faculty members, the researchers themselves, and helps create a more professional, centralized service. So here are some examples of what would be included in this kind of system. So you may have data from HR, your classic research papers and patents and book chapters and grants, perhaps data sets, but then also teaching and professional activities, committee work, et cetera. as well as organizational units and equipment and facilities such as core facilities and animal care facilities, all of these pieces of information that are absolutely critical to have a sort of dashboard view of the research activity at a university. And so Elements, the product innovated by that PhD physicist at Imperial, helps make that more seamless for the end user. And as Jane and Scott so wonderfully set up for me, and I will dig into this a little bit more when I share some insights about Figshare with you, mandates from governments, mandates from funders have been a huge driver in causing universities to think about structuring their the services they provide to researchers and enabling the access to publications and to data sets. But I want to emphasize that it's not only funder mandates and government mandates. Yes, those are huge drivers, and obviously, you know, it has been said, I think Francis Collins said this at Davos, that when it comes to academics, you can't herd cats, but you can move the cat food. And certainly when grant dollars are at stake, academics will listen, universities will listen. But it's not only external forces that are driving this. There are internal forces as well. So just from a management perspective, the leadership at universities need to have a dashboard of research activities that may be to support benchmarking, that may be to support measuring growth and demand for and need for upgrading facilities or investing in infrastructure. That may be for hiring, recruitment, promotion. So that's sort of an academic, administrative view, but also from a researcher perspective or a researcher lens. There's also a need to network and find colleagues, find collaborators. And that is hugely facilitated by having a systematic approach to tracking people's research productivity and creating, for example, researcher profiles. If we left updating researcher profiles, for example, to faculty members, I think it would. I don't think anyone in this audience would be surprised to hear that they would become very dated very quickly. You know, there'd be exceptions to the rule, but having that be a centralized function is a boon to researchers, to enable them to find others within their organization who share their research interests. You know, many research universities have hundreds, if not thousands, of faculty members spread across medical schools, engineering schools, faculties of arts and sciences. And so this is a real problem that these services help address. So Elements is agnostic as to the data source, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so robust. It was not born out of a particular company or data source, but rather from academia in its infancy, and therefore opportunistic about what sort of data sources can feed into this research management system. Both commercial data sources, non-commercial data sources, internal data sources, and as well as things such as HR records, which can help provide, for example, name disambiguation templates. And this is sort of the standard slide illustrating the complexity of wrangling, to use Scott's favorite term, data from multiple different sources and bringing them in seamlessly into one system so that this is what the end user sees and interacts with. And last slide on symplectic, there's also a need to work with other players in the field and contribute to industry standards. And obviously, you know, ORCID's a great example of an industry standard that is hugely helping the research community. So moving on to Figshare, And I won't spend too much time on these because they've already been covered by Jane and Scott, but Figshare is a response to the problem that much researcher data does not end up in publications and ends up sort of trapped on laptops and computers in laboratories. And certainly many agencies have been increasing their call for data to be open. I won't read all through these, but it's not just NIH, it's also NSF and even NEH that is calling for dissemination of data. Governments such as Canada have launched working groups to create deliverables to support the openness and dissemination of research data. And I think this is a great quote, so I will take the moment to read it, from the then Vice President of the European Commission. And you may have heard of Horizon 2020, which is a huge pot of funding for European countries to fund scientific research. Taxpayers who are paying for that research will want to see something back directly through open access to results and data, and indirectly through making science work better for all of us. That last clause is the new bacon. That's the impact. And you can see very clearly here the connection between why is the state open? It's open so that we can access it, we can replicate it, reuse it, but also so that we can begin to put together the picture of how this is impacting society and societal challenges. I would say that open access is a wave that's unstoppable, but there are elements feeding into it that make it more or less strong. So recommending that data be open is a start, but it's really the mandates that are getting everyone's attention. But it's when the organizations that are mandating open access actually carve out funding to enable researchers and institutes to build infrastructure to support open access. I think that it's really going to take hold, and we talked a little bit about those many universities are taking those steps in that direction. And then lastly, and this is something I don't think we've seen too much of yet, but the enforcement of those mandates will certainly be a signal to the community. And you can start to begin to map funders and where they sort of are on that trajectory of mandating and providing infrastructure or repositories or data centers and providing resource to comply with those mandates. So Figshare is an in-the-cloud data repository that was born out of a need, as I mentioned before, to provide a home and a citable home for data that was not that may not be in a paper. And I picked out this example because I worked on voltage-gated sodium channels for my PhD. I would have loved to have had this service when I was a graduate student. I spent a lot of time emailing things back and forth to various people, my advisor, experts, when I was struggling with Western blots for this bloody sodium channel. And it was painful, and it took a lot of time. And it would have been much more efficient for me to use something like Figshare. And I'm not alone. Figshare has a lot of interest both from individual researchers, but also from publishers as well, who find it to be a very useful solution, for example, for housing supplementary data. And for the publishers in the audience, you know, supplementary data is this ugly stepchild of research papers that you know, is lightly edited, it's lightly formatted, and yet it's very critical, crucial information. Lots of controls that may not have made the headlines of the paper, but are critical for researchers down the line. And so Figshare not only allows the tracking and reporting of data it hosts, but also the team provides consulting, and they help promote awareness for institutes that want to adopt Figshare as a single repository, and help generate interest and use of the repository. They also, just like we saw with Symplectic and working with industry, across industry players to develop standards, Figshare also is very evangelical about open access to data and works with other groups to help create the beginnings of standards for what does it mean for something to be reusable and citable and well, metadata rich for the long haul. So lastly, and very quickly, I just want to talk about impact. So you may be familiar with the Research Excellence Framework. If not, there's lots of, it's got a Wikipedia page. I want to focus on something that was just introduced in the last cycle, and that was the mandate from the UK government for researchers to submit what they call impact case studies to the UK government. This is what these impact case studies look like. Okay, that's a real impact case study. You can, by the way, they're all available. They're online. You can download all 7,000 of them. They're lightly structured, but as you can see, they're very much a text-based report. And the challenge of understanding the story that these impact statements tell was the challenge that was put to digital science. And I'll share with you some insights about how that work was accomplished. But again, this is a mandate from the government for researchers to explain how their research has directly impacted society. And I think you're going to see more and more of this going forward. So I have bigger fonts in the next few slides, but the colors here are pink for life sciences, blue for physical sciences, and then roughly purple for humanities, and yellow for, purple for social sciences and yellow for humanities. So these are the units of assessment that the researchers would submit their impact statements into. And here are I'll just cruise through these, the different units of assessment for the life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, and humanities. And I'll take just 2 minutes to sort of geek out on this. This is topic modeling, which is like my favorite kind of analysis in the world. So topic modeling is a bottom-up approach to categorization. And since many of you are librarians, I think this would be, many of you probably have heard of topic modeling before. It's certainly been embraced by digital humanities folks in many ways. But essentially, it's a way of, rather than categorizing documents, of analyzing documents and finding patterns, in a nutshell. And so I'll use an example from my field, from neuroscience. I actually did this research with a professor at Princeton. If you take 10 years worth of Nature neuroscience abstracts and you analyze them with topic modeling, you will see a cluster that contains terms like suprachiasmatic nucleus and optic nerve and melatonin. And as a neuroscientist, you look at that and you say, that's circadian rhythms. That wasn't an expert picking out those terms and clustering them. That was an algorithm finding a pattern in a corpus of data. And that's what topic modeling is. And that technique was applied to these 7,000 impact statements in order to see what would bubble up. It's obviously way too complex to go through, but one does begin to see some patterns emerging from that data. And you can look at a particular topic, in this case, schools and education, and see which of those units of assessment contributed most strongly to societal impact in schools and education. And no surprise, the big purple one is the unit of assessment education itself, but it's certainly not the only unit of assessment where there's been impact on schools and education. So I guess if I had to sum this up in a pithy nutshell, I'd say that, yes, information may want to be free, but humans want and need, and I dare say need, to understand. And it's the application of these analyses to, open data sets I think that's going to really yield the payoff for us. So open is the first step, not the end goal. This report, by the way, is available. I think it's on King's College's website. If you want to take a look, it's really gorgeous graphics, and it's quite an interesting read. And I'll just end, this is my last slide, with an illustration of how there's an iterative process between the producers of information and the agents that are seeking to understand the meaning within that information. And so on the left side of this slide are all of the questions that were in the request for proposal that digital science responded to and won, that the UK government sought to answer in investigating and analyzing these case studies. And not all of them were really tractable. But that's, this is the first time this exercise has been run, and so that's to be expected. But what you can see here is the connection between the question and then the technique all the way on the far right-hand side that was used to address that question. And you can kind of locate the analysis in the document this way. The point is that it's the iterative process of analysis and then these mandates for reporting that I think are going to really move things forward. So perhaps the next time, in 6 years, when the next research exercise framework is run, or if other countries begin to adopt this approach, we'll have some insights. If we want to address question number 8, what do we need to do to ask the researchers to provide the data in such a way as to make the analysis more straightforward? So it's an iterative process, but one that I think has the door has been opened with open access, but it really does take innovative analytics to begin to provide some meaningful answers for us humans. So I'll end there. Thank you so much. I think that's a great question, and that's certainly a concern that I have heard before. That this is a pendulum that swings between pure and applied, and maybe it's going to swing too far in the direction of applied. I wish I had a elegant answer for you, but one must find a balance, right? We certainly wouldn't want to fund only knowledge for knowledge's sake research. But I agree with you that some research needs to be pure and not applied.
Nice long walk to formulate a question. Digital science developed as a kind of offshoot of a publishing organization and is doing a vast number of services for the scientific community that, traditionally publishers would take the content created by scientists and distribute it. And there's a vast difference between the content that is currently being created and generated and distributed. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about how the role of publishers is changing and is becoming not just distributing the published content, but also this other material, this other research outputs, call it, that is much broader than traditional publication, and how the two are fit together within one organization. What does it mean to be a publisher nowadays when you're distributing data sets, when you're distributing lab notebooks, when you're distributing a vast variety of essentially software services? And what's the what makes a publisher and a software provider in this environment?
It's a great question. And I have certainly seen, even in the 10 years that I've been in science publishing, a big transformation of investment from many publishers into, I would call it, and maybe an extension of IT, but into data science. Digital science certainly has a very strong data science team. PhD computer scientists that run natural language processing and other sort of text mining algorithms on data. So I would say that you could put it this way, that as information becomes more copious and explodes, the problem that a publisher is solving becomes one of helping the end user navigate that information efficiently. And it's an evolution. So heuristics that worked in one era are going to change and shift as new players come onto the scene, and focused shifts from, say, a paper to more living data sets. So I think the publishers, and I think Jane said it very well, have to evolve and have to experiment, and not everything's going to work. But what we will see, when things do work, quite innovative services for the community. I hope that answered your question.
Am I allowed to ask more than one? Okay, I promise I'm not pulling a Dane Cook on anyone. I just want to be sure. I have a question more on the vendor side of things. Whenever you see all this, we have Altmetrics and Figshare and Bills List and open access and so on and so forth, sometimes these things come down the road and it ends up just being a trend. You know what I mean? Like I agree with you. By the way, your presentation was amazing. I got a lot. My hand was cramping trying to take so many notes. Open data, I agree with you, is going to be an unstoppable wave. I think people have been advocating for that for a long time. But also, there are other sides of things, like I'm sure Bill's List has huge supporters in this room and huge detractors in this room. I saw a publisher from Bill's List that had a picture of a dog with a pizza on its back. So obviously probably not a strong publisher, but then also, again, he's being sued for defamation. So, how do you, as far as determining, how do you determine what is actually a trend and what's here to stay? Do you know what I mean? Because
I totally know what you mean, and I've got a very concise and solid answer for you.
All right.
So, it's as I mentioned earlier, Howard gave me my first job. Howard Ratner gave me my first job in science publishing, and he actually hired me as an intern. Nature had this scheme where they took PhDs and put them in parts of the company outside of editorial. Ironically, now I'm an editor after 10 years. But I've traveled a lot through tech, business development, and customer-facing research. And I had an intern about 3 years ago. And I say he was my intern, but truth be told, I was his intern, because this is Stanford MBA, PhD in material science from Northwestern, had a very, very excellent technique for separating the cool from the core. And it's very simple. Think of the therapist's couch and your community that you want to serve as the patient on the couch and you find out where the pain is. What is causing suffering? What is problematic? Not is it cool, not is it neat, not is it awesome, but like what do people do with their day and what do they wish they could do with their day? And if you can provide a solution that takes the boring, tedious crap out of your workday, you have a winning product. I'll leave it at that.